The boardroom doors closed so softly that Samuel Grant almost missed the sound, but the silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the glass walls. Caroline Bennett, 7 months pregnant, and still standing in a tailored navy suit beside the long conference table, had just been told by her own board that she was no longer fit to lead the family tech company her father built, and she had saved twice. No one shouted. That made it worse. The men and women around the table spoke in polished sentences, the kind that sounded legal before they sounded human. For the stability of the company, one said. For investor confidence, another added. Then Denise Harper, the board member with the calm smile and the silver pen, slid a folder toward Caroline and said, "This is not personal, Caroline. It is responsible governance." Samuel stood near the back wall in his plain work jacket, the visitor badge on his chest slightly crooked, a worn leather document bag hanging from one shoulder. He was not an executive. He was not a lawyer. He was a contract archivist, the kind of man people only noticed when a box needed moving or a record needed finding. On the chair beside him sat his son Oliver's small backpack, half unzipped, with a hospital appointment card peeking out between a math worksheet and a folded peanut butter sandwich wrapper. Samuel had planned to leave early that afternoon to take Oliver to the clinic, but then the emergency request came in: locate the old board contract archive before the vote. Nobody asked why a single dad with tired eyes was still standing there. They only wondered why he had not left. Caroline noticed him last. Her face, controlled but pale, turned toward Samuel as if she had just remembered he was in the room. "Mr. Grant," Denise said before Caroline could speak, her voice smooth enough to sound kind and cold enough to warn him. "This portion of the meeting is private. The archive department has already provided everything relevant." A few executives glanced at Samuel with the faint embarrassment people reserve for someone who has walked into a room above his station. One younger board advisor smirked at the mud on Samuel's work shoes. Another looked at Oliver's hospital card and then quickly away, as if ordinary life was indecent in a room built for billion-dollar decisions. Caroline, hurt and cornered, made the wrong judgment too. "Thank you for your help," she said quietly, but the words carried a dismissal. "You can go now." Samuel did not move. He looked at the folder in Denise Harper's hand, then at the stack of papers beside the projector, then at the old company seal stamped on the first page of the termination packet. For 2 seconds, his tired, calm face changed, not into anger, not into fear, but into recognition. He had seen that seal before. Not on the packet they were using to remove Caroline. On something older. Something misfiled. Something Denise had insisted was obsolete. "Mr. Grant," Denise said, sharper now, "you are not authorized to review board materials." Samuel reached slowly into his document bag. The room tightened. Caroline's hand went to the edge of the table, steadying herself. Samuel did not pull out a phone, or a threat, or a speech. He pulled out a flat brown archive folder with one faded red label: Hidden Board Contract and Founder Protection Clause. The label was small, almost boring, the kind of thing powerful people count on being ignored. But Denise saw it, and for the first time all morning, her pen stopped moving. Samuel placed the folder against his chest instead of handing it over. His other hand rested for a moment on Oliver's backpack, touching the corner of the hospital appointment card like a reminder of why a man with nothing to gain might still refuse to walk away. "I think," he said softly, "there's one document the board hasn't read out loud." Caroline stared at him, still wounded, still unsure whether to trust the man she had just dismissed. Denise smiled again, but now the smile had effort behind it. "That file is irrelevant," she said. Samuel looked down at the Hidden Board Contract and Founder Protection Clause, then back at the pregnant CEO being pushed out in front of everyone she had once protected. And in that quiet pause, before the folder opened, the room began to understand that the firing had happened too soon. Samuel did not open the folder in the boardroom that morning. Not yet, because men like him learned early that truth released too soon could be twisted before it landed. He slid the Hidden Board Contract and Founder Protection Clause back into his worn document bag, nodded once to Caroline Bennett, and walked out under the cold eyes of people who thought calm meant weakness. By 5:30, the glass tower was behind him and his real shift had begun. He picked up Oliver from after-school care with 6 minutes to spare, signed the clipboard with the same careful handwriting he used on archive logs, and pretended not to notice the late pickup fee circled in blue ink beside his name. Oliver climbed into the old pickup truck with his backpack pressed to his chest, the hospital appointment card still tucked in the front pocket, like a quiet deadline neither of them wanted to talk about. "Did you find the important paper, Dad?" Oliver asked. Samuel turned the key twice before the engine caught. "Maybe," he said, "but important papers have to be handled the right way." They stopped at the grocery store on the way home, where Samuel counted prices the way some men counted poker chips. Store-brand soup, discount bread, a bag of apples because Oliver liked them sliced thin. He put back the orange juice after checking the rent reminder on his phone, then bought the smaller carton anyway when Oliver did not ask for it. That was the kind of father Samuel was. Not loud, not heroic in a way anyone would photograph, just quietly subtracting from himself so his son would not feel the math. Their apartment kitchen was small enough that the refrigerator door bumped the chair if it opened too far. Bills sat in a neat stack under a chipped mug: rent, electric, clinic balance, school lunch notice, car insurance. Samuel did not throw them around or curse at them. He lined them up by due date, wrote numbers in a notebook, and circled what could wait without becoming dangerous. Oliver did homework at the table, one sneaker tapping the chair leg, while Samuel made grilled cheese and tomato soup with sleeves rolled to his elbows. On the counter, beside a half-empty bottle of dish soap and a pile of school papers, the brown archive folder rested like an object from another world. Hidden board contract and founder protection clause. It looked too plain to hold a company's future. It looked too ordinary to expose a betrayal. But Samuel knew that was how power liked to hide. Not in locked vaults, but in boring language, in old signatures, in pages people assumed no one poor, tired, or low-ranking would ever read closely. After dinner, Oliver fell asleep on the couch with a math worksheet on his chest and the appointment card still sticking out of his backpack. Samuel covered him with a faded blanket, washed the dishes, and sat down at the kitchen table under the yellow light. He took out the folder. First came the board contract, dated 12 years earlier, back when Caroline's father still controlled the company and Denise Harper was only an outside counsel with perfect handwriting. Then came the amendment pages, the shareholder consent forms, the founder protection clause buried behind language about continuity, emergency removal, pregnancy incapacity, and hostile board action. Samuel read it once, then again. Then he opened the termination packet Denise had pushed across the table and placed the two documents side by side. The dates did not match. The witness initials had been copied in the wrong order. A paragraph Denise called obsolete had never been revoked. And there, in the margin of the original founder protection clause, was a notation that changed everything. No board action removing a Bennett family CEO could stand without independent archive verification. Samuel leaned back slowly. Outside, a siren passed somewhere far away. Inside, Oliver slept through the sound, trusting the room because his father was awake in it. Samuel did not smile. He did not celebrate. He just took one clean sheet of paper, wrote Caroline Bennett's name at the top, and began listing proof in quiet, careful lines. By the time the clock passed midnight, he understood why Denise had wanted him out of that boardroom before the folder opened. By the next morning, Caroline Bennett's company looked untouched from the outside, all glass, steel, and quiet money rising over the business district like nothing human could happen inside it. The lobby screens still played the same polished video of Bennett Systems building secure medical software, factory logistics tools, and family-owned technology that promised to make American companies safer and faster. Investors still saw the clean version: quarterly growth, institutional confidence, a pregnant CEO stepping aside for temporary governance reasons, and a board promising stability. But up on the 23rd floor, the air had changed. Caroline stood in the glass boardroom with one hand resting lightly against her stomach, looking out over the factory campus beyond the river where her father's first warehouse still carried the Bennett name in faded blue letters. She had not slept. Her phone had not stopped. Bank representatives wanted reassurance. A private equity group wanted a call before noon. The company's senior engineers were asking whether the leadership change meant layoffs. A hospital client had paused a contract renewal. Every corner of the business seemed to be waiting for her to disappear quietly so someone else could explain what had happened to the company she had protected for years. Denise Harper moved through that pressure like she owned the room. She wore a cream-colored suit, carried the silver pen, and spoke with the soft authority of someone who knew exactly where the weak points were. "Caroline, you need to understand how this looks," Denise said, placing a fresh set of documents on the conference table. "You are under medical strain. The market is sensitive. The board is not removing your legacy. We are protecting it." Around them sat lawyers, finance officers, an outside crisis consultant, 2 board members avoiding eye contact, and 1 bank liaison who kept checking the time. On the large screen, a timeline of the leadership transition glowed in blue and white. Emergency vote, interim chair appointment, investor statement, press release. It looked official. It looked final. That was the point. Caroline read the words without touching the paper. She had built her career learning not to react in rooms where people expected emotion to make a woman look unfit. She kept her voice steady. "And Samuel Grant?" she asked. Denise's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes narrowed. "The archivist?" He said there was one document the board had not read out loud. A lawyer at the far end of the table shifted. The bank liaison finally looked up. Denise gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. A low-level records employee found an old folder and got confused. It happens. Legacy archives are messy. That is why governance decisions are made by qualified people. The words were clean, but Caroline heard the insult inside them. Not just toward Samuel, but toward anyone whose job was to remember what powerful people preferred to forget. Denise tapped the transition packet with her pen. The relevant materials are already here. Yet on the side table near the projector, among duplicate binders and sealed envelopes, sat one thin folder no one seemed eager to open. It had been requested from the archive, but not entered into the meeting record. Caroline saw only part of its faded label from where she stood, just enough to recognize the words hidden board contract and founder protection clause. The phrase should have meant nothing if Denise was right. It should have been obsolete, harmless, a dead document from another era of family control. But the more everyone ignored it, the more it seemed to pull the room toward itself. The crisis consultant began rehearsing language for the press. "Caroline Bennett will remain a valued founder voice." A board member suggested framing the decision as compassionate continuity. Someone else mentioned that if the bank accepted the transition by 3 o'clock, the emergency credit line would remain open and the investor call could proceed. Power, Caroline realized, did not always arrive as a threat. Sometimes it arrived as paperwork placed in the right order, with the wrong page missing. Denise stepped closer to her and lowered her voice. "You have a child coming. Do not turn this into a public fight you cannot win." Caroline looked from Denise to the folder, then to the screen where her own removal had been converted into bullet points. For a moment, she thought of Samuel standing in the back of the boardroom, muddy shoes, tired eyes, one hand near his son's hospital appointment card, saying there was one document the board had not read out loud. Caroline still did not know what he had found. She did not know why Denise seemed more worried about an archivist than a lawsuit. But when the bank liaison asked whether all founder-related protections had been reviewed, Denise answered too quickly. "Yes," she said. And across the room, the unopened folder seemed to become heavier than every signature on the table. Samuel Grant first understood they were no longer asking for records when Denise Harper placed a signature page in front of him and covered the lower half with her palm. "Just confirm the archive chain is complete," she said, her voice gentle enough for witnesses and firm enough for obedience. The legal office beside the boardroom was smaller than the main conference room, but it felt colder, with frosted glass walls, a locked file cabinet, and a printer humming like it had been working all morning to make a lie look organized. Samuel looked at the page, then at the reference number in the top corner. It did not match the archive log he had pulled the night before. "This says the founder protection materials were reviewed and found inactive," he said. Denise's smile stayed in place. "That is correct." Samuel did not pick up the pen. "I can't sign that." Across the room, Caroline Bennett stood near the window with her phone in one hand and a legal briefing in the other, trying to hold herself together while bank calls, investor pressure, and her own board pressed in from every side. She was tired, visibly pregnant, and still wearing the armor of a CEO who had learned not to let pain show in public. When Samuel refused, her eyes lifted sharply. "Mr. Grant, not now." He turned to her, careful with his tone. "The system entry is wrong. The AI index marked the original clause as superseded, but the scanned amendment is missing a witness page. If I sign this, it says the archive confirms something the archive does not confirm. A junior attorney gave a quiet laugh, not loud enough to be rude, just loud enough to reduce him. The archive system has already flagged the active documents. Samuel glanced at the tablet on the table, where the database had highlighted the termination packet, the emergency vote, and a clean leadership transition timeline. It looked convincing because software always looked convincing to people who wanted certainty. But Samuel had spent 12 years with contracts that had coffee stains, crooked staples, missing dates, and handwritten margins that never made it into polished summaries. The index is reading the newer packet, he said, not the original board contract. The hidden board contract and founder protection clause was filed under a legacy family governance code. Someone changed the tag. Denise's face hardened for half a second. Caroline missed it because her phone buzzed again. Another banker, another deadline. Oliver sat outside the glass wall on a hallway bench, small shoulders hunched over his backpack, the hospital appointment card tucked into the clear pocket where Samuel could see it every time he looked over. The boy had been quiet all morning, too old to cry in public and too young to understand why grown people in expensive suits kept looking at his father like he was a problem to be removed. Samuel saw him watching through the glass and lowered his voice. I'm not trying to slow anything down. I'm trying to keep you from signing over a decision that may not be legal. That was when Caroline cut him off, and the words came faster than she meant them to. You are not my counsel. You are not a board member. You are an archivist who was asked to locate documents, not interpret them. The room went still. Samuel absorbed it without blinking, but Oliver heard enough through the glass to look down at his shoes. Caroline saw that, and regret flickered across her face, but pride and pressure swallowed it before it could become an apology. Denise stepped in immediately, smooth as closing a drawer. Exactly. And because Mr. Grant is now obstructing a board-certified process, we need to document his refusal. Samuel looked back at the signature page. The pen sat beside it like a small trap. You can document it, he said, but I won't certify a false chain. One of the security officers near the hallway shifted his weight. Oliver hugged his backpack tighter, the appointment card bending against the plastic window. Caroline pressed her fingers to her temple, overwhelmed by too many fires and the one man in the room insisting the smoke was coming from somewhere else. Samuel, she said, softer but still edged with command, please step aside. He looked at her, then at Denise, then at the folder that everyone kept calling irrelevant because admitting it mattered would change the room. I will step aside, he said, but I need the file preserved. Denise placed her silver pen down with a click that sounded like a verdict. No, she said. What you need is to surrender company property and leave the building before this becomes a formal removal. Samuel did not argue when Denise Harper told security to wait outside the legal office. He only asked for one thing, and he asked in the same calm voice he used when Oliver forgot his homework folder or the truck refused to start on cold mornings. Before I leave, let me copy the archive log number into the incident record. Denise almost refused. Caroline Bennett looked exhausted enough to refuse for her. But the request sounded harmless, almost clerical, and that was why they allowed it. Samuel stood at the side table, opened the brown folder marked Hidden Board Contract and Founder Protection Clause, and turned the pages slowly beneath the overhead light. No one in the room understood what he was really doing. To them, a contract was language. To Samuel, a contract was a timeline wearing paper skin. He looked at the old board contract first, not for the paragraph everyone argued about, but for the quiet things people skipped, the spacing between initials, the staple shadow, the page count printed in the lower corner, the notary stamp pressed slightly deeper on the second sheet than the first. Then he found it. A tiny archive receipt number at the bottom of the Founder Protection Clause, almost swallowed by the faded photocopy grain. B-17-4C. On the termination packet Denise wanted him to certify, the same clause was referenced as B-17C4. 2 characters reversed. To most people, it would have looked like a scanning error, the kind of clerical mistake that disappears under phrases like legacy system issue or administrative cleanup. But Samuel knew the company's old family governance codes were not random. The last 2 characters identified the storage category. For C meant active founder protections. C4 meant canceled advisory drafts. Someone had not merely misplaced the hidden board contract and founder protection clause. Someone had changed its identity inside the archive system, so the AI index would treat the living document like a dead one. Samuel felt the discovery settle in his chest, not like victory, but like weight. He glanced through the glass wall. Oliver was still on the hallway bench, trying to finish a worksheet with the hospital appointment card poking from his backpack. The boy looked up when he sensed his father watching, and Samuel gave him a small nod that meant, "I am still here." Inside the office, Denise was speaking to Caroline in a low voice. This is exactly why the board acted. Disorder, confusion, emotional pressure. We cannot let an archivist turn a governance transition into a conspiracy. Caroline's eyes moved to Samuel, and for one moment he thought she might ask what he had seen. But the pressure around her was stronger than curiosity. The bank deadline was approaching. Investors were waiting. Lawyers were already drafting statements that made surrender sound mature. Samuel placed his finger beside the receipt number, not touching the ink. "This reference code was altered," he said. The junior attorney sighed. "Mr. Grant, archive metadata is not legal evidence. It is when the metadata is the reason the legal evidence was excluded." Denise gave a small laugh, but this time it came too quickly. "Listen to yourself. You are building a fantasy out of 2 letters and a number." Samuel did not raise his voice. "Not 2 letters. A category reversal. The original clause was never revoked. It was moved from active founder protections to canceled drafts in the search system, but the physical receipt proves where it belonged." Caroline's expression tightened. The words meant something, even if she did not yet know how much. Denise stepped between them before the silence could grow useful. "Enough. This is outside his role." Samuel looked at Caroline past Denise's shoulder. "Your father's board contract required independent archive verification before any emergency removal. That means if this clause is active, the vote that pushed you out may have no standing." The room should have stopped there. Any honest room would have. Instead, the people with titles began protecting the decision they had already made. The attorney said the court would need to determine admissibility. The consultant said a delay would spook the market. The bank liaison said uncertainty could trigger a credit review. Denise said Samuel was confused by legacy filing language. Caroline looked from one face to another, trapped between the man with the proof and the people who controlled the consequences. Samuel closed the folder gently, because he understood something painful then. Being right was not the same as being believed. The hidden board contract and founder protection clause had spoken clearly, but everyone in power was still pretending not to hear it. And as security opened the door behind him, Samuel noticed one more mark beside the receipt number, a handwritten initial that did not belong to the archive department at all. By 2 o'clock, Bennett Systems was no longer pretending the transition was clean. The bank froze the emergency credit line pending confirmation that Caroline Bennett's removal had been properly authorized. The investor call moved from routine reassurance to crisis containment. A hospital network that depended on Bennett's medical scheduling software sent a notice demanding proof of leadership continuity before releasing the next payment. At the factory campus across the river, supervisors were told to delay a shipment because the insurance renewal required an active CEO certification, and payroll quietly became a question no one wanted to say out loud. Every department felt the same invisible hand tightening. Finance waiting on legal waiting on the board waiting on Denise Harper, and Denise Harper acting as if the whole building would collapse unless everyone stopped. Listening to Samuel Grant, she had positioned herself perfectly. If Caroline was removed, Denise would become interim board authority over the restructuring committee. That committee would control the bank conversations, the investor disclosures, the factory cost cuts, and the sale of a minority ownership block that had been blocked for years by Bennett family protections. On paper, it looked like responsible crisis management. In practice, it gave Denise power over the very protections she had buried. Samuel saw it from the archive floor before anyone upstairs admitted it. Requests began disappearing from the records queue. Access logs were limited. A folder path connected to the hidden board contract and founder protection clause was suddenly marked restricted. When he tried to print the archive receipt history, the system flashed a message saying his permissions had been modified by board counsel. He did not slam the keyboard. He simply wrote the time by hand in his notebook, copied the error code, and placed it beside the old receipt number he had found earlier. Men like Samuel did not survive on outrage. They survived by keeping records when everyone else counted on exhaustion. Outside the glass wall of the records office, Oliver sat in a plastic chair with his backpack between his feet, trying not to ask whether they were still going to make the hospital appointment. The card was bent now, the corner soft from being touched too many times. Samuel saw his son watching the elevator, watching executives pass without seeing him, watching his father become smaller in a building full of people who needed him to be wrong. "Are we in trouble?" Oliver asked quietly. Samuel paused over the folder. The hidden board contract and founder protection clause lay open under a desk lamp, its old paper edges yellow against the clean white copy Denise had tried to certify. "No," he said after a moment. "We're just at the part where telling the truth gets expensive." Upstairs, Caroline sat at the head of the boardroom table while the company's general counsel explained that challenging the vote could trigger an ownership dispute, scare lenders, and force a public filing before the investor call. The crisis consultant warned that any delay would make Caroline look unstable. The bank liaison said the freeze could become a default notice if leadership authority remained unclear by morning. Denise let each warning land before she spoke. "This is exactly why we cannot indulge archival confusion," she said. "Caroline, the company needs one voice. If you fight this now, employees lose paychecks, clients lose confidence, and your father's legacy becomes a courtroom headline." Caroline looked across the table at the folder Samuel had sent through an assistant after security blocked him from the floor. She had not opened it. Not fully. She could see the label, Hidden Board Contract and Founder Protection Clause, and beneath it Samuel's careful handwriting on a sticky note. Receipt code altered. Original may still be active. For a moment, her expression softened, not with trust yet, but with the first crack in certainty. Then her phone lit up with a message from the factory director. "Payroll authorization pending CEO verification." The room waited. Denise watched her closely. Caroline put one hand against her stomach, inhaled slowly, and chose the language of survival over the discomfort of doubt. "Proceed with the transition statement," she said. "We follow the board's decision until legal tells us otherwise." Denise nodded as if relieved. Samuel, standing alone beside the records office printer with Oliver's hospital card in his hand and the original proof in front of him, felt the cost of those words before the rest of the company did. Caroline Bennett had just doubled down on the decision that might destroy her. The firing happened in the lobby, not in an office, because humiliation works better when it has an audience. Samuel Grant had just stepped out of the records elevator with the brown folder tucked under his arm and Oliver beside him. The boy's backpack hanging from one shoulder, the hospital appointment card bent inside the front pocket like a small white flag. They were almost at the security desk when Denise Harper crossed the marble floor with two guards, the head of human resources, and enough witnesses to make the moment feel official. "Mr. Grant," she said, her voice carrying just far enough for receptionists, assistants, junior analysts, and waiting vendors to look up. "You are being terminated for unauthorized access to confidential board materials, interference with governance proceedings, and misrepresentation of company records." Oliver stopped walking. Samuel felt it before he saw it. The way his son's hand tightened around the backpack strap, the way a child tries to become invisible when adults turn shame into theater. Samuel did not argue. He shifted the folder slightly so it stayed flat against his side. The label Hidden Board Contract and Founder Protection Clause was covered by his forearm, but the weight of it seemed to press through everything. A young analyst whispered something to another, and both looked at Samuel's worn shoes. Someone near the coffee bar laughed under his breath. "That's the archivist," a man said. "The one who thought he could overturn a board vote." Denise let the comment hang there without correcting it. That was her gift. She rarely had to insult anyone herself. She created rooms where other people felt safe doing it for her. Caroline Bennett arrived at the top of the lobby stairs just as HR handed Samuel the termination envelope. She had come down for the investor call, dressed in a black maternity blazer, face composed, one hand steadying herself against the rail. For a second, Samuel looked up at her, and she looked back. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath around the question neither of them said. Would she stop this? Denise turned smoothly. "Caroline, this is being handled. We cannot risk further disruption before the call." Caroline's jaw tightened. The bank freeze, the payroll deadline, the public filing risk, the board's pressure, all of it sat behind her eyes. She saw Oliver then, small and stiff beside his father, and something human moved across her face. But she was still trapped inside the belief that stability had to come first, even if stability was being built on a page no one wanted to read. Samuel received the envelope, folded it once, and put it in his coat pocket. The HR director asked for his badge. He removed it. Carefully, the security guard reached for the brown folder. Samuel pulled it back, not sharply, just enough to make the lobby notice. That folder is company property, Denise said. The original is company property, Samuel replied. This is a certified archive copy with my incident notes attached. It belongs in the dispute record now. Denise's expression cooled. You are not part of any dispute record. Samuel looked at Caroline, not Denise. His voice stayed low, but the silence carried it. If you let them file that transition before independent verification, the bank won't just freeze the credit line. They'll question the authority behind every signature made after the vote. Payroll, vendor payments, hospital contracts, factory insurance, everything tied to CEO certification could be challenged. A few people in the lobby stopped pretending not to listen. Caroline's eyes moved to the folder. Samuel continued, still calm. The hidden board contract and founder protection clause is not about protecting a title. It is about preventing exactly this kind of rushed removal. Your father knew a board could panic, or be persuaded, or hide the page that slowed them down. Denise stepped closer. Enough. Oliver looked up at his father, and Samuel felt the boy's fear land harder than any insult. He wanted to kneel, to explain that being escorted out did not mean being wrong, that sometimes quiet men were treated like trouble because they kept receipts. But there was no time. The security guard opened the front doors. Cold afternoon light poured across the marble floor. Samuel adjusted Oliver's backpack, making sure the hospital appointment card did not fall out, then turned once more toward Caroline. I hope I'm wrong, he said, because if I'm not, by tomorrow morning, every person in this building will learn the difference between a clean transition and a forged one. Denise gave the lobby a polished smile, the kind meant to seal a narrative. The company is stable, she announced. The investor call will proceed as planned. Caroline said nothing. The guards walked Samuel and Oliver outside. Behind them, the doors closed. The lobby resumed its expensive calm, and Bennett Systems looked, for one more hour, like a company that had survived the problem. For almost 40 minutes after Samuel Grant and his son walked out through the front doors, Bennett Systems appeared to recover. The lobby returned to its polished rhythm. Receptionists answered calls in calm voices. Executives moved quickly, but not desperately. The investor call began on time, with Denise Harper seated 2 chairs from Caroline Bennett, her silver pen resting beside a printed statement that described the board transition as orderly, unanimous, and fully supported by governance review. Caroline read the first lines exactly as prepared, her voice controlled, her face steady on the video screen, one hand out of sight beneath the table where no investor could see it pressed lightly against her stomach. Then the first question came from the bank's risk officer. Before we discuss liquidity, can you confirm that the emergency removal vote was certified under the active Bennett family governance documents? The general counsel answered before Caroline could. Yes, all relevant documents were reviewed. There was a pause on the line. Not long, but long enough to change the temperature in the room. Our audit system shows a mismatch, the risk officer said. The certification packet references archive code B17C4, but our collateral file from the original credit agreement references B-17-4C as an active founder protection schedule. No one moved. Denise's pen stopped halfway through a note. The general counsel frowned at his tablet, as if the screen had personally betrayed him. That may be a legacy coding issue, he said. We are checking. Then a second alert arrived, this one from finance. Payroll authorization failed because the system could not verify the signer's authority under pending governance status. 2 minutes later, the hospital network's contract portal flagged the same issue. CEO certification disputed. Then the factory insurance broker sent an urgent email warning that any shipment released under an improperly authorized executive transition could trigger coverage review. The experts went to work. Lawyers opened binders. The crisis consultant rewrote language. Finance refreshed dashboards. The outside audit team joined the call and began asking for the original board contract, not the summary, not the transition memo, not Denise's clean packet, but the original record tied to the credit agreement. The more the experts explained, the worse it became. Their polished documents all pointed to the same altered code. B-17-C4. Cancelled advisory drafts. The one Samuel had refused to sign. Caroline sat very still while the room filled with professional panic. Denise leaned toward the general counsel and whispered that the archivist had contaminated the record, that his notes should be excluded, that unauthorized copies could not be trusted. But a junior compliance analyst named Maya, who had been quiet all afternoon, raised her hand from the far end of the table. She looked barely older than the interns, with a laptop covered in department stickers and a face that showed she knew speaking now could hurt her career. "I found something," she said. No one listened at first. The general counsel was asking the bank for more time. The crisis consultant was drafting a statement about technical review. Denise was telling Caroline not to overreact. Maya spoke again, a little louder. The bank file was uploaded before Samuel Grant accessed the archive today. It already had B-17-4C. That means he didn't create the discrepancy. The room quieted. Maya turned her laptop toward the screen. And the change from 4C to C4 happened 6 weeks ago, under board counsel access. Caroline's eyes moved slowly to Denise. For the first time all day, Denise looked less like a person managing a crisis and more like someone measuring exits. The bank risk officer's voice returned through the speaker. Until the original hidden board contract and founder protection clause is produced and independently verified, Bennett Systems' credit line remains frozen. A red banner appeared on the finance dashboard. Payroll release pending authority confirmation. Another notification followed from legal. Ownership challenge risk elevated. The false stability Denise had promised did not shatter all at once. It cracked in small, documented places, exactly the way Samuel had warned. Caroline looked at the empty chair where the archivist should have been, then at Maya's trembling hand still resting on the laptop. Somewhere outside the building, Samuel was probably sitting in traffic with Oliver, trying to make a hospital appointment after being escorted out like a fraud. Inside the boardroom, every expert in the company finally understood that the man they removed had left with the only map through the crisis. The first real fragment of truth did not come from a lawyer, or a board member, or one of the outside experts billing by the hour. It came from Maya, the junior compliance analyst whose hand still trembled as she enlarged the audit trail on the boardroom screen. Caroline Bennett leaned forward, her face pale but controlled, while the room watched a simple timeline undo the story Denise Harper had spent all morning building. 6 weeks earlier, the archive system had listed the original founder protection materials under B-17-4C, active governance schedule. 4 days later, board counsel access changed the tag to B-17-C4, canceled advisory drafts. 2 days after that, Denise requested a governance summary for emergency removal authority. And that morning, Samuel Grant had refused to certify the same altered code because he had noticed what everyone else had missed. The room went quiet in a different way now. Not the cold silence of power, but the embarrassed silence of people realizing they had mistaken confidence for truth. Caroline stared at the screen, and in her mind, she saw Samuel standing in the lobby with his worn jacket, muddy shoes, and tired, calm face while executives whispered around him like he was a man who had wandered into a room above his class. She saw Oliver beside him, small and stiff, the hospital appointment card bent inside his backpack. She heard her own voice cutting Samuel off. "You are not my counsel. You are not a board member. You are an archivist." The memory landed harder than any investor question. Denise moved first. "This proves nothing," she said, but the sentence did not have its old weight. A metadata trail is not a legal conclusion. Maya swallowed. "No, but it proves the document was active before the tag was changed." The general counsel adjusted his glasses and finally reached for the brown duplicate folder Samuel had left behind. Until that moment, the hidden board contract and founder protection clause had been treated like a nuisance, a prop in an archivist's delusion. Now the folder sat at the center of the table, while 5 powerful people leaned toward it like it had started breathing. The first page was old, stamped with the Bennett family seal. The second carried the original board adoption date. The The third referenced emergency removal limits. The fourth contained the sentence Denise had tried to bury in procedural dust. No forced removal of a Bennett family CEO could take effect during a contested emergency vote without independent archive verification of all founder protection clauses. Caroline read it once, then again, her hand resting against the curve of her stomach. Independent archive verification, she said softly. No one answered. The phrase belonged to Samuel, the man they had fired. The man escorted out in front of his son. The bank risk officer, still on speaker, broke the silence. Do you currently have access to the archivist who identified the discrepancy? Denise's eyes sharpened. We can assign someone else. The risk officer's reply was immediate. Not if he was the certifying records employee on the incident trail. We need the person who found the mismatch, his notes, and the original archive chain. The general counsel looked at Caroline. The crisis consultant stopped typing. A board member who had been loyal to Denise all morning finally leaned back, as if he wanted distance from the table itself. Caroline looked at the folder again. Hidden board contract and founder protection clause. It no longer looked small. It looked like the only honest object in the room. Where is Samuel now? She asked. HR checked a tablet. His badge was deactivated. Security logged him out at 3:12. He may have left for his son's medical appointment. The word son's medical appointment struck Caroline visibly. Oliver's backpack. The bent card. The boy watching his father be treated like a fraud. For the first time that day, her expression was not controlled enough to hide shame. Denise stepped closer, lowering her voice. Caroline, bringing him back, gives him leverage. Caroline turned to her, and something in the room shifted. No, she said quietly. Firing him gave you leverage. No one spoke. Then the bank risk officer said the sentence everyone had been avoiding. You need him back before any filing goes public. Caroline closed the folder with both hands, not angrily, but carefully, the way a person handles evidence after finally understanding its cost. She looked toward the glass doors, toward the lobby where Samuel had walked out with dignity no one had earned the right to mock. Find him, she said. And across town, Samuel Grant was sitting under fluorescent lights in a hospital waiting room, unaware that the company that had thrown him out was now searching for the man who still held the missing piece. By the time Samuel Grant's phone rang in the hospital waiting room, Bennett Systems had stopped being a private crisis. Oliver sat beside him in a plastic chair, one hand around a paper cup of water. The hospital appointment card finally checked in at the front desk after a day of delays no child should have had to understand. Samuel had just opened a folded bill from his coat pocket when Caroline Bennett's name appeared on the screen. He stared at it for one breath, then another. Oliver looked up. Is it them? Samuel nodded once, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just recognition. Across town, the company was unraveling in front of investors. The bank had kept the credit line frozen. Payroll had failed its authority check twice. A factory supervisor had shut down an outgoing shipment because insurance counsel refused to certify coverage under disputed leadership. Then the real danger arrived. A minority investor filed an emergency ownership challenge, claiming the board vote had triggered a control event. An investor livestream meant to restore confidence had become a public recording of executives dodging questions they could not answer. Reporters had begun calling. Employees were refreshing payroll screens. Vendors were demanding payment guarantees. And in the middle of it all sat the hidden board contract and founder protection clause, no longer a dusty folder, no longer an archivist's obsession, but the one object that could decide whether Caroline had been legally removed or whether the board had forced out a pregnant CEO using a broken chain of authority. Samuel answered the phone quietly. Caroline's voice came through lower than before, stripped of the boardroom armor. Mr. Grant, I was wrong. He did not speak right away. In the background, he could hear muffled voices, a speakerphone, the sharp urgency of people who had run out of polished language. Caroline continued. The bank needs your archive chain. Legal needs your incident notes. And I need to know whether my father's protection clause is still active. Samuel looked at Oliver, whose eyes were fixed on him with the tired seriousness of a boy who had watched adults make his father small. My son has an appointment, Samuel said. I know, Caroline replied, and the shame in her voice was quiet but real. I am sorry for what happened to him. To both of you. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment. He had imagined many things during the drive from the company to the hospital, but not this. The people who escorted him out now needing him back before their own signatures turned against them. He could have made them wait. He could have let the silence punish them. But Samuel had never been fighting for ego. He had been fighting because records mattered, because paychecks mattered, because a child in a waiting room should not inherit a world where powerful people could hide a clause and call it governance. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. "Oliver comes with me." When Samuel returned to Bennett Systems, he did not enter through the lobby like a man seeking revenge. He walked in holding Oliver's hand, with the hospital appointment card tucked safely back into the boy's backpack and the certified archive copy held flat under his arm. The same marble floor was there, the same security desk. Some of the same employees who had watched him be fired now turned away in embarrassment. Caroline came down herself to meet him, still pale, still pregnant, but no longer. Pretending certainty was strength. Behind her stood Maya, the junior analyst, and farther back, Denise Harper, composed on the surface but watching the folder as if it had become a witness. "Mr. Grant," Caroline said in front of everyone. "Thank you for coming back." Samuel gave a small nod. "I came back because the record is incomplete." They brought him upstairs to the investor room, where the live stream had been paused, the bank remained on speaker, and the board's emergency counsel waited with a court filing open on one screen. Samuel placed the hidden board contract and founder protection clause on the table with both hands. He did not look at Denise. He did not look for an apology. He opened his notebook, aligned the archive receipt, the altered code, the original page count, and the handwritten initials in a clean row. Then he said, calmly enough for every microphone in the room to catch it, "Before anyone files another statement, you need to understand which document was changed, who had access, and why the vote may have never been valid." The room went still again, but this time no one mistook silence for control. Samuel Grant did not raise his voice when the investor room filled with lawyers, board members, bank officers on speaker, and employees watching through a delayed internal stream. He knew that the louder a room became, the more carefully proof had to be placed. Caroline Bennett sat at the head of the table, no longer pretending the company was calm, one hand resting against her stomach while the other held the edge of the hidden board contract and founder protection clause. Denise Harper sat 3 chairs away, composed but too still, her silver pen untouched for the first time all day. Oliver sat quietly near the wall beside Maya, his backpack at his feet, the hospital appointment card visible in the front pocket like a reminder that this was not just a story about titles and shares and board votes. This was about what powerful decisions did to ordinary people when nobody checked the paper. Samuel opened his notebook and laid out 4 items in a straight line. The original archive receipt, the old board contract page, the altered digital log, and the termination certification Denise had tried to make him sign. "This is simple," he said. "Not easy. Simple." The bank risk officer asked him to proceed for the record. Samuel pointed to the first page. 12 years ago, when Bennett Systems accepted its first major credit facility and outside investor protections, Caroline Bennett's father added a founder protection clause. It did not make Caroline untouchable. It did not make the board powerless. It required one thing before any emergency removal of a Bennett family CEO could take effect: independent archive verification of all founder protection materials. He moved his finger to the receipt number at the bottom of the old document. "This is the original storage code. B-17-4C. Active founder protections." Then he placed Denise's certification packet beside it. "This packet cites B-17-C4. Cancelled advisory drafts." He let the difference sit there. 2 characters. A tiny reversal. The kind of detail rich rooms laugh at until money stops moving. The board relied on the C4 code to say the clause was inactive. The bank relied on the 4C code in its collateral file to say the clause was active. That is why payroll froze. That is why the factory shipment stopped. That is why the investor filing could trigger an ownership challenge. The documents disagree because one of them was changed. Denise leaned forward. "Metadata confusion does not prove fraud." Samuel nodded once, as if he had expected the sentence. "Correct. Metadata alone does not." He turned to Maya. She connected her laptop to the room screen, and the audit log appeared large enough for everyone to see. Samuel continued, "So we checked the access history. 6 weeks ago, the active code B-17-4C was changed to B-17-C for under board council credentials. The user session was opened from this floor. The change happened 17 minutes after a draft restructuring memo was uploaded, the one that gave interim board authority to the committee chaired by Denise Harper. A board member shifted in his chair. The bank officer asked for the screen to be frozen. Samuel pointed to the next line. The same session then generated a governance summary excluding the Founder Protection Clause. 4 days later, that summary was used to support the emergency removal vote against Caroline Bennett. This means the board was not shown the active clause. It was shown a version of the archive that made the clause disappear. Denise's face tightened. You are implying intent. Samuel looked at her for the first time. No, I am showing sequence. Intent is what investigators decide after they ask why the person who benefited from the wrong code also controlled the committee created by the wrong code. The room went silent. Caroline looked down at the hidden board contract and founder protection clause, and the whole day rearranged itself in her mind. The rushed meeting, the polished language, the insult towards Samuel, the pressure to sign before anyone could breathe. Samuel picked up the final page, the one with the handwritten initials he had noticed when security opened the door behind him. There is one more thing, he said. The original receipt has a margin initial from the board counsel who logged the physical document into active storage. It is not mine. It is not Caroline's. It matches the initials on Denise Harper's early legal review from 12 years ago, before she joined the board. She knew this clause was active because she helped classify it. Denise stood slightly, then stopped herself. The general counsel whispered her name, but she did not answer. Samuel placed the page flat on the table, not dramatically, not like a man winning, but like a man returning weight to its rightful place. That means Caroline Bennett was forced out before the required verification was completed. The emergency vote was defective. Any filing based on that vote risks breach under the bank agreement, dispute under the investor terms, and challenge under the family governance documents. Caroline's eyes filled, but she did not look weak. She looked awake. The bank risk officer spoke slowly through the speaker. Based on the evidence presented, we cannot recognize the transition certification without corrected board action. Maya exhaled. One of the board members put his head in his hands. Oliver looked at his father with a kind of quiet pride. That Samuel could feel without turning around. Samuel closed the folder halfway, then said the only sentence in the room that did not sound like business. Power talks first. Proof talks last. The room goes silent. And in that silence, everyone finally understood that the single dad they had escorted out had not brought the company down. He had stopped it from signing its own collapse. Caroline Bennett did not let the correction happen behind closed doors. By dusk, the investor room had been reopened, the internal live stream restarted, and every department that had spent the afternoon watching payroll alerts, bank warnings, and leadership rumors was invited to hear the truth from the person who should have spoken it sooner. Caroline stood at the center of the frame, visibly tired, visibly pregnant, and no longer protected by polished language. The hidden board contract and founder protection clause rested on the table in front of her, not as decoration, but as the document that had forced the room to become honest. Samuel Grant stood off to the side with Oliver beside him, the boy's backpack at his feet, the hospital appointment card still tucked into the front pocket. Samuel had not asked to be on camera. He had not asked for applause. He had only asked that the record be corrected before another worker missed a paycheck because powerful people were too proud to admit a mistake. Caroline looked into the lens and began simply. Earlier today, my board announced a leadership transition based on a vote that we now know was not properly verified. That was wrong. The room held still. She continued. Samuel Grant, a contract archivist in this company, identified a discrepancy in the archive record connected to the hidden board contract and founder protection clause. He raised it before the vote was finalized. He was dismissed, discredited, and removed from the building. That was also wrong. A few employees watching from the factory floor later said that was the moment the company began breathing again. Not because every problem was solved, but because someone with power finally stopped hiding behind vocabulary. Caroline turned toward Samuel. Mr. Grant protected this company when the rest of us were too focused on speed, optics, and authority to listen. Samuel gave a small nod, not smiling, not performing forgiveness for people who had embarrassed his son in a lobby. The bank officer confirmed on the call that the credit line would move from frozen to conditional review once the board corrected the defective action. Payroll was released under Caroline's restored authority, pending formal ratification. The factory shipment remained paused for compliance, but the workers were told their checks would clear. The hospital contract portal removed its emergency hold. The company was bruised, but no longer blind. Then Caroline addressed Denise Harper. Denise sat at the end of the table with counsel beside her, her silver pen gone, her confidence replaced by a careful legal stillness. Effective immediately, Caroline said, Denise Harper is suspended from all board committee authority pending an independent audit, outside legal review, and full examination of the archive access records connected to this matter. No one cheered. It was not that kind of victory. It was better than that. It was process. It was consequence. It was the grown-up version of justice, slow enough to be real and documented enough to last. Denise's face tightened, but she did not interrupt. The same paper trail she had trusted to bury the truth was now the paper trail that would follow her. After the cameras shut off, Caroline walked to Samuel in front of the remaining executives. I want you reinstated immediately, she said. With back pay, a formal apology, and protection as a reporting employee. Samuel looked at Oliver first, then at the folder on the table. I'll help finish the archive verification, he said. But I need something clear. Caroline waited. Samuel's voice stayed even. No one on this board speaks to my son, uses my family, or turns my job into a public warning again. If there is a concern about my work, it goes in writing, through process, with witnesses. I keep records for a living. From now on, so will everyone else. Caroline accepted the boundary without flinching. Agreed. For the first time all day, Oliver looked at his father. Without fear in his face. The hidden board contract and founder protection clause was folded carefully into a new evidence sleeve. No longer hidden, no longer mocked, no longer small. It had protected a CEO, a company, payroll, factory workers, and one single dad's dignity. And as Samuel picked up Oliver's backpack to finally take him home, the people in the room understood that the public reversal had not made Samuel powerful. It had simply forced power to recognize the man who had been right while standing alone. Samuel Grant did not stay for the celebration because there was no celebration in him. When the final signatures were corrected, the payroll release confirmed, and the board's emergency authority suspended pending review, he simply gathered the papers that belonged in the record and placed the hidden board contract and founder protection clause into a clean evidence sleeve. He folded the certified copy carefully, not like a trophy, but like something that had done its job and deserved to be protected. Oliver stood beside him in the quiet hallway outside the investor room, his backpack hanging from one shoulder, the hospital appointment card still visible through the front pocket, now wrinkled from a day that had stretched far beyond what any child should have had to carry. Are they mad at you? Oliver asked. Samuel looked through the glass wall at the room where executives were still speaking in low voices, where Caroline Bennett sat with her hands folded over the company her father built, where Denise Harper's empty chair waited for the audit that would ask questions paper could finally answer. Some of them probably are, Samuel said. But that is not the same as being wrong. Oliver thought about that as they walked toward the elevator. The building felt different now, not warmer exactly, but less certain of itself. People stepped aside when Samuel passed, some embarrassed, some grateful, some unsure what to do with a man they had watched be dismissed and then needed back. Samuel did not punish them with silence, and he did not reward them with easy smiles. He gave small nods where nods were enough. Outside, the city had settled into evening. The glass tower reflected the last orange light, and for once it looked less like a place of power and more like a place made of windows, every room visible if someone cared to look closely enough. Caroline came down before he reached the doors. She did not bring cameras or lawyers. She brought only the folder she had promised would be preserved and a face softened by the kind of humility that arrives late, but still matters. Mr. Grant, she said, your record will show that you protected this company. Samuel glanced at Oliver before answering. Make sure it shows that the process failed before one person fixed it. That matters more. Caroline nodded, understanding the boundary inside the words. Samuel was not asking to become a hero. He was asking the company to stop needing heroes because its systems were honest enough to protect people before damage was done. In the truck, Oliver finally relaxed into the passenger seat, tired and hungry, his hospital sticker still on his sleeve. Samuel started the engine, then paused before pulling away. The hidden board contract and founder protection clause sat folded safely in his document bag, no longer hidden, no longer a weapon, no longer a burden for one quiet man to carry alone. Oliver looked at him and asked, "Dad, why didn't you yell when they didn't believe you?" Samuel kept both hands on the steering wheel for a moment, watching the building lights flicker on one floor at a time. "Because yelling makes people look at you," he said. "Proof makes them look at what they did." Oliver leaned back, satisfied in the way children are when an answer becomes something they can keep. They drove home past grocery stores, bus stops, office towers, and apartment windows glowing with ordinary lives. Bills were still waiting on the kitchen table. Rent would still be due. The clinic would still send statements. Samuel would still pack lunches, check homework, fix the truck when it complained, and show up to work with careful notes and clean records. But something had changed that could not be measured in a paycheck. Oliver had seen his father stand alone without becoming cruel, be mocked without becoming small, and be proven right, without turning dignity into revenge. That was the inheritance Samuel cared about most. Not money, not status, not a public apology that would fade by morning. A child had watched his father protect the truth gently and firmly, and maybe that would teach him that character is not what you claim when people cheer for you, but what you keep when they try to erase you. In a world where power can hide behind titles, the quietest person in the room may still be the one holding the record that saves everyone.